Hey guys, um, I'm gonna show you some strategies for finding a topic and sort of settling in on an idea, some methods, the hypothesis. Generally, this is what graduate students do when they're sort of trying to come up with a question that they're going to test and developing background information to support it and trying to explain the relevancy of their studies. So you're essentially, again, doing what any sort of researcher would do, but instead of having months or years to work on it, you only have days or weeks. So I'm going to try and help narrow down the strategy here. Now, I've done a little bit of searching on my own, not because I had a topic in mind, but just I sort of randomly picked a topic and then just kind of followed some of the different threads that I'm going to suggest that you try to follow when you're trying to find a strategy of your own. I'm going to have to be jumping around between screens, so it's going to be a little bit jumpy. I apologize, but let me see if I can bring up some of the suggestions and strategies that I have for you as you are coming up with your own topic ideas. Now, first thing to know is that in the folder on Schoology, there are a couple of PDF files that are review articles. So I've found a couple of these articles for you. These are hopefully going to be really, really helpful in trying to narrow down a topic idea, right? Because I think that's probably the most daunting task, is to figure out all the things I could possibly study. How do I even find something so specific that I could come up with a proposal to test my idea in a year or two? So these review articles actually explain or discuss some of the general impacts of climate change on biological organisms and systems. Now, the thing about this is that this is a chapter, I think, from a textbook or of a larger a series of manuscripts, but so it's not a very specific article, but it is very broad in discussing different strategies, different effects that climate change may have on organisms. The problem is that they don't typically cite specific studies. In other words, they reference studies. They make reference to the fact that there was a study that happened, but they don't provide a citation. So that's a little bit more of a challenge, but not impossible. So I just kind of scrolled through this, and then so here are some subsections: how climate impacts life. There's climate and individuals. You might note that they also have hyperlinks here. These blue highlighted text words have hyperlinks to other review articles. Typically, I found when I clicked on these hyperlinks that the review articles themselves are fairly broad as well. That may be helpful, it may not, but what I tended to do, so I scroll down because I just randomly chose a topic, literally randomly. I came down to this section, and there's a whole lot of, you can see now, specific studies to specific species that are referenced. So for example, if we look at this section of text, it says that changes in species geographic ranges in recent decades reflect the processes of local extinction of populations and invasion of other areas, creating new populations of species. So again, this is sort of reference to the fact that climate change has happened, and one of the effects can be that maybe species are going extinct or their ranges are changing. And they say, for example, as climate has warmed, isolated populations of Edith's checker spot butterflies in the southern part of the range in North America have been more likely to go extinct, while new populations have emerged to the north. So this thing, you can tell, because they're now talking about a specific species, that they're referencing a study which has been done, right? The authors of this review article didn't do this study. They're citing the results of another study that has been done to support the statement that they made earlier. Well, that's interesting. Maybe you want to look up Edith's checker spot butterflies and see if you can find something. In my particular case, I focused in on this paragraph here. Again, I did this randomly. I didn't have any prior knowledge of the species that I highlighted this text because it's important, but I didn't have any particular affiliation or affection for Paiute ground squirrels, but they did mention that ground squirrels face extreme heat during summer months and low water availability. As a result, ground squirrels enter a period of seasonal inactivity or estivation during summer months to decrease their energetic demands. So what this is saying is that when conditions get really unfavorable, hot, and maybe not as much food, that ground squirrels actually estivate, which is kind of like hibernate, but the author goes on to say that as summers become warmer, right now we're sort of looking at something that seems to have something to do with climate change, and precipitation decreases, the length of the inactive season will increase, while in the wet season, when ground squirrels obtain food for estivation, shortens. And then this sentence seemed to be really crucial. Paiute ground squirrels, and then here's the Latin name, Spermophilus mollis, from the western United States have been shown to enter estivation early in response to early spring drought. So right now we're sort of looking at a study which suggests that squirrels that normally wouldn't perhaps go into estivation until early summer are actually doing it earlier, and they think because of drought, which seems to be coming on earlier because of potentially of climate change. And it says if the drying trend continues to increase, these animals may not acquire sufficient energy resources during the shortened growing seasons to estivate over the longer, drier months. Wow, this thing just really jumped out at me, right? So this was, everything in this whole review article, I focused in on this one particular paragraph. It seemed interesting to me. I didn't know anything about Paiute ground squirrels. I didn't know that they went into estivation. In fact, I actually didn't know what estivation meant. Actually, I did, because I studied ecology. But let's say you didn't know what estivation meant. Well, what I would suggest you do is come up with, I'm going to jump around to another document here, is come up with a basic document that has some sections in it that you can fill out as you go along. Now, I didn't provide this for you. I just made this up this morning. But I came up with things like, for example, the question, right? Obviously, there's a question that I'm going to try and answer. There's a hypothesis that I'll make later. In fact, the hypothesis is something I'm going to do at the very, very last step of this initial brainstorming session, because the hypothesis is something that you need a lot of information to develop. It wouldn't be something that jumped right out at you. The other thing is that to apply for money from the NSF, you need to explain the relevancy of your study. Why is what you're doing important or relevant? So again, that's another section in this, and I'll fill this out as I go. I added a section called things to know, right? Or things to look up, because I don't know what they are. And I included the word estivation in here because it's an unusual word, and I don't think I've used it this year in our class. So, here's another question I added for later, but we'll get back to that. And then another section called how can I test my hypothesis? In other words, my methods. How do I actually know how to test something once I come up with a question? And typically you can get this from method sections from other papers, but I'll get back to that later. Right now, I wanted to find the word estivation. So jumping around here. I just Googled the word estivation. I included an A, that's probably the formal scientific or maybe even British spelling of this. And Google came up with estivation without an A, but it's the same thing. In zoology, it's a prolonged torpor or dormancy of an animal during a period which is hot or dry. So, you know, I can copy this and add it to my document. And I don't know that I necessarily need a citation for this right now. It's always something I can probably find and cite later. But I'm just going to go ahead and now I've got my definition of estivation, prolonged torpor or dormancy. Okay, so I'm going to again jump back to my doc. Now I know what estivation is. Well, the question now is, who were the people who did the research on Paiute ground squirrels? I want to find this study. Now, this is a little bit more challenging because if I scroll down to the end of my document where normally we would find a literature cited, well, they just kind of have further reading, which are basically other, usually review articles. I don't find anything in here on Paiute ground squirrels. So I basically have to then figure out where this article is. Well, it's not that actually hard to find this original article. I have the name of the species that I'm interested, as well as the Latin name. I know that they studied it in the Western United States, and there's something that in this article about estivation. So what I actually did was just copy this whole sentence, and then I went to my Google search. And I typed in that, or I've just pasted that whole sentence. And of course, something came up from ResearchGate. Now, I don't know if the library has subscribes to ResearchGate. If they don't, then we can't get the article this way. And that's sometimes a bit of a challenge. Sometimes you can find an article, but it's maybe not available, or not, at least not easily available. We'll be talking with the librarians early next week, and they will offer strategies on finding articles that are harder to get if they don't have a subscription service. They can help you, or I can help you. So please don't give up if you don't find it. If you click on this link and it comes up with the abstract and then a little thing to get the full text, and you click on that and it says you need a subscription. Don't end your search there. What I actually did is sometimes I actually, at the end of this, I'll add PDF, because PDF narrows my search down. Sometimes it'll only find the article I'm looking for in a PDF format. So I did that, and there's, again, a PDF here, but I clicked on that and it turns out that it's the same one that I found before. It's not actually the PDF, but I scroll down a little bit and let's see. On my next page, I found the article. It says view content. Well, I clicked on this. Bada bing, bada boom. This is the article then that was cited in the original article on the Paiute ground squirrels and the effects of climate change. Now, I actually have this open as a PDF, so I'm going to jump again over to the actual PDF form of this. So here's the article again in PDF form. And now this is going to be my most important article. Right, here's the original article on Paiute ground squirrels. Now this, again, is really pithy, and part of the challenge, I think, for some of you will be just reading some of these scientific journal articles. And let me quickly offer some suggestions on how to read these. For the most part, I would suggest that you do not wade through the entire text. You will make it about 3 paragraphs in, and then just, even I, who have read thousands of scientific journal articles, find that if I skim through the entire article, I don't get very much. I find the most informative articles, or the parts of the article in general, the most relevant sections would be the abstract, because they tell you everything in 1 paragraph. That's helpful. But often the introduction and the discussion sections are the most important sections. And so I highlighted this text because it's a really, really important opening paragraph. And I'll tell you why in a second. Just quickly, let me read it to you. Paiute ground squirrels are key prey of raptors and other predators in the Snake River Birds of Prey National Conservation Area. They are a critical food source for falcons, red-tailed hawks, ferruginous hawks, ravens, badgers, western rattlesnakes, gopher snakes. Ground squirrels also loosen, aerate, move, and mix soils, thereby increasing primary productivity. Their loss, therefore, may have serious ecological consequences. Boom, boom. This paragraph is huge. And I think you could probably guess why. Because here is the relevancy of why anybody should care about Paiute ground squirrels, right? And that's part of the challenge, is to justify why you're going to study what you're going to study. Well, here you go. They're an important species, ecologically speaking, because almost everything eats them, and they also help ecologically by loosening soil and increasing plant growth and so on and so on. So clearly, reducing the populations of Paiute ground squirrels would impact other species tremendously. This is a really important paragraph, and I don't want to copy and paste it and use it directly in mine. But what I do want to do, perhaps, is copy and paste it. Let's see if I can copy paste it. There. So I want to copy and paste this just into my general document, on my NSF proposal in the relevancy section, because that is the relevancy. That's going to help me state my relevancy. Again, emphatically, do not copy and paste this and use it directly in yours. What you can do, though, is now that you have this really important paragraph, that you can refer to this and help you develop your relevancy in your own NSF proposal. Notice that the formatting got all goofy because I copied and pasted it, but that doesn't really matter. We have the substance here. Now we have the relevancy, or at least a really good start on why my project is important or relevant. Now I'm going to jump back again to the article very quickly. Right, so I scroll down, there's more stuff in the introduction. I went through a whole, see how much I'm skimming over. And eventually I get to the discussion section. And I read through this already, so I can tell you I skimmed it, and there's a whole lot of stuff on just how they identified the age of the different ground squirrels that they trapped in their study. There's another hypothesis that one of the reasons that their population seemed to be declining is because they were exposed to the plague, right? There's a flea which carries the infectious agent that causes the plague. Ground squirrels can get the plague, they can die. So basically there's a little bit of a paragraph here on the fact that it didn't seem to be the plague. And so again, coming to the section that's really important for my hypothesis or my question is whether it is climate change. And here we go again, I highlighted a really important section here. The most plausible explanation for the early disappearance of Paiute ground squirrels is that ground squirrels entered seasonal torpor early in that year. Ground squirrels are normally above the ground through the end of June, but weather conditions can influence the timing of emergence. And then I skimmed down a little bit more. Ground squirrels are not known to feed on dry vegetation, and emergence into torpor often coincides with drying of succulent green vegetation. Boom. Really, really, really important. This is going to be, eventually, this will be my question. So they've suggested it. They didn't determine it. They suggested that the disappearance of the ground squirrels in 2002 was that they entered torpor early. And that seemed to be a product of the fact that the vegetation was drying and disappearing. And since ground squirrels don't eat dead or dry vegetation, they went into torpor a little bit earlier because it was so hot and dry. So again, I'm going to copy this. As soon as I can get my I-beam. There we go. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to put it into my question section. Right, this isn't my question yet. This is something eventually that will help me form my question. And now again, I'm going to jump back to the document. I'm going to highlight this section here. Sorry. There we go. Close enough. There. This will help you form a question. Again, it's not my question yet. What I'm doing is gathering information from my different sources and putting it into one document that will help me when I go to actually form my question, right? And again, I'm leaving the hypothesis section for now because I need to figure out more about the question that I'm asking before I generate a hypothesis. But basically what I'm asking then is whether ground squirrels, Paiute ground squirrels, are going into torpor or estivation earlier as a result of the availability of vegetation. That's going to be my question, right? If vegetation dries up sooner, do these ground squirrels go into torpor earlier? If they do, this will affect other species that typically eat them because they would be around longer in the year. Right? So now I'm starting to get the formation of a question. Well, I guess what I want to know now is, how do I test for torpor? Right? How the heck do I know when these things are going into hibernation, summer hibernation? So again, I'm going to jump around a little bit here, but So here's what I did. I actually just went into my good friend Google, and I just typed in test of when squirrels go into torpor, right? A super general question, but you know, it's probably a specific enough question. I'm not going to get some random article from some random person on the internet. It's usually just going to be a scientist who tests this sort of thing. Well, I did find an article on trying to understand what makes squirrels tick. I clicked on this. It wasn't terribly helpful. Scrolled down, a couple other things didn't. Well, boom, look at this. Here's somebody from, this is a journal called Nature, who tests for torpor. Well, now I know how I can test for knowing when these squirrels go into torpor. This will help me test my question and hypothesis. It's also probably going to help me with my methods. So I clicked on this. And here's an interesting article that talks a little bit about the fact that old tests of knowing when these things go into torpor weren't all that helpful. And they came up with a electrocardiogram telemeters, right? So they actually had a little device that they caught some squirrels, put this thing on them, and then tracked them, and then collected data remotely. That's what this is telling me. And they only did it for 13 squirrels, but they revealed that as the animals entered and exited torpor states, the heart rate began to change well before body temperature. They have a great device now. Now I know how I'm going to test for torpor. So I went to this article, the Journal of Experimental Biology, to see if I could find the original article. Here it is. And again, I'm scrolling through a lot of information here, but as I scroll down here towards the end of the introduction, here, where's the section of that? This is not a PDF, so I wasn't able to highlight the text. Well, there was a section that was, oh, here we go. Perfect. All right, so here's the authors of that study on how they found torpor. Improving our identification of these transitions will also advance our understanding of hibernation. The duration of torpor depends largely on the time of year and ambient temperature, but with individual species, these periods may differ among populations depending on latitude. Well, it's not interesting to me, really. Local environmental conditions such as rainfall. Ooh, that sounds kind of interesting. As well as food quantity. So what they've done in this study is explained that their method of detecting torpor is helpful in species in understanding torpor where food quantity may affect them. This study then, this Humphreys study, is one that seems pretty important. So I clicked on that. It took me down to this reference down here. And what I did was, again, I typed in actually copied this, the title of the article, Role of Energy Availability. And again, I found a whole lot of things that weren't terribly helpful here, but I think I added PDF to it. And I eventually found this link here. And when I clicked on View PDF, I got the whole article. Boom. And that's what this article is here. And I'm just going to show you, again, I skimmed through the introduction, and I didn't even get to the discussion of this. I got to the introduction, and they said here at the very end of the introduction, just before the methods, often this is an important paragraph, the one that precedes the methods, and they said, Eastern chipmunks are food-storing hibernators, and they said because of the reliance on stored food, we tried to manipulate, and this is really important, we were able to manipulate hibernation energy availability directly in the field by providing designated individuals with supplemental food near their burrow entrances. Boom, right? Now I've actually know exactly how I can test this on ground squirrels. I go out to the area where the original authors looked at Paiute ground squirrels. I find a study area. I split it into two with a control group where I don't manipulate anything. And then my experimental, in my experimental group, I keep near their burrows, I keep adding fresh food. I also trap a bunch of squirrels in both of those habitats. I attach those devices that they just discussed in the previous article. And then I know exactly when they're going into torpor or estivation. And again, my question that might now be more specifically zeroing in on the effects of food availability. So if the climate change is causing droughts more frequently, the effects of this could be measured on ground squirrels by giving the ground squirrels extra food, right? My experimental group, extra food, extra green food that they would eat longer into the season, whereas as vegetation naturally dried up, my control group, I would think, might actually enter estivation earlier because they don't have that supplemental food. So I basically, in whatever, 20 minutes or so, now I've done this before, so it was a little faster for me, but I basically in 20 minutes, I was able to zero in on a question. I was able to figure out particular species that I wanted to study. I was able to figure out the basic research methodology. I have a bunch of articles that can be really helpful. Now, I also kept these articles open so that I can come back to them. You may eventually want to create a folder on your laptop where you drop articles that are important. So you just save them there so you always have them. Some of the challenges, though, for you still might be zeroing in on a question. They may be finding journal articles. I am here to help. The librarians are here to help. But I think if you just start with the general review articles that I linked in the folder on Schoology, that was my very, very first step. Skim through it till you find something that's interesting. Find a species within a paragraph that may be experiencing problems related to climate change. And then from there, you can just start to build out your NSF proposal. And again, I'm going to come back to this Word document. I would recommend creating something like this. Oh, how can I test my hypothesis? Well, that article I literally just showed you, I can copy and paste content from that in here so I know that this is how I can test my hypothesis by supplementing food. These other guys did it. I just have to read about how they did it and basically do their basic experimental study, but just on Paiute ground squirrels. I don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's already studies that have used the telemetry devices. There's already studies that have supplemented food in ground squirrels. My methods are just going to be revised methods from other people's experiments. But again, I want to make this very, very, very clear. Do not copy and paste this into your actual NSF proposal. I just put this in here because this is reminding me of what I need to, in my own words, develop my question or state my relevancy. You cannot, should not, and do not, will not directly copy and paste. Absolutely do not. I just did it on this informal document as references for me, and eventually I'm going to come in here and maybe type in my own question. Does the availability of green grass affect estivation in Paiute squirrels or something like that? I mean, I can obviously wordsmith that better, but now this is something that's in my own. Anyway, that's, I think, a good start, and I'm sorry that it was jumping around and it was very slow, but I wanted to really step you through how I would do, how I would approach this particular project, because it can be daunting and overwhelming to not have a question and not even know where to start. But once you get started, it really starts to fall into place fairly quickly. And obviously, I'm here to answer any questions you might have. Good luck with it. It's not as bad as it might seem. It's actually pretty fun.